Anyway,
He drove away.
we're getting kicked out.
What?
They told us to get lost.
No.
Is that rude?
That's what I said.
Rude that they told us to
I
leave.
thought, let's think of all the publicity I could bring you. All of my YouTube subscribers. All 3 of them.
Wait, you have 3?
It's generous. And we're back at Charlotte Motor Speedway, as the sign says. Apologies for that rude interruption. Now, where were we? How long is a NASCAR race? There really is no definite time frame. It's kind of like baseball. There's 9 innings in baseball. Well, in NASCAR, there's X number of laps. The Daytona 500, for example, is a 500-mile race. In each case, you're going to see the length of the track divided by the total number of miles in the race. The Coca-Cola 600, for example, is run at Charlotte Motor Speedway, a 1.5 mile track. Therefore, 400 laps will get us to 600 miles. And even the laps that are run behind a pace car track, those still count towards the total number of laps. You're going to see starts and restarts. Typically, these are the most exciting parts of the race. You'll have the entire 40-car field bunched up together, nose to tail, and a lot can go wrong. A driver might miss a shift, he might spin the tires. Any one of a number of things can happen. If you're at the track, you'll see the entire crowd stand up for the start and the restart.
I think all these manufacturer alliances are now out the window. Your best friend is the car right in front of you or right behind you.
I still think that move can be made without some help coming to the checkered flag, though, Mike.
It'll be 4 laps to go. Newman, Logano on the front row, green flag.
They roll along approaching that restart zone. It's this space before the start-finish line in which the driver in first place chooses when everybody else goes. So once the driver in first place crosses into the restart zone, they're free to hit the gas whenever they want, but nobody else can do it before them. If the driver spins the tires or misses the shift, well, at that point, he's being pushed by the 20 cars behind him.
Out of the race. You'll listen to Coleman Presley's spotter for Brad Keselowski as they approach the Geico restart zone. It'll be 50 laps to go.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Green flag. Soft half off you. He's going to hit you now. Denny, soft off him.
Let's take a second to talk about the flags you're going to see as a spectator at a NASCAR race. First, green, green, green. Boogity, boogity, boogity. Go, go, go. Green is exactly what you think it is. It means competition is on. We are racing. You'll see it at the start of the race. You'll see it at every restart. The yellow flag. The yellow flag is the caution flag. No passing allowed on the yellow flag. As soon as there's an incident on the track, a car has spun out, a car has hit the wall, 2 cars have made contact, there's debris on the track, anything like that, the yellow flag will come out. The pace car will come out and lead the field around. No passing the pace car either, unless if you're the driver, the first driver who's a lap down, then you get what's called the wave around, and you do get to pass the pace car. So you get to pass the pace car and race around to the back of the field. You may be at the back of the field, but at least you are on the lead lap. The red flag, a red flag is similar to a yellow flag. Something has happened on the track, but typically it's far more serious. It's unsafe for any car to pass at any speed. And so that's when the red flag will come out. If the red flag comes out, something is seriously wrong. The green, white, checkered flag, that'll come out to signal the end of a stage. The black and white checkered, it's the same in every motorsport. It is the end of the race. Now, stage racing, it's kind of like innings in baseball or quarters in basketball or periods in hockey. And typically there's 3 stages, sometimes there's 4 on a really long race, say like the Coca-Cola 600. NASCAR's only come out with it in the last few years. If a driver wins a stage, then they get points. At the end of a stage, you'll see that green, white checkered come out, and you'll see the whole field go under caution and the whole field slow down. And it's really just a way for NASCAR to break up the race. It's really geared towards the fans, and it's been a controversial move because some of the NASCAR purists will say that this is not the way it's been done. You know, basketball teams never win at the end of the first quarter, so why are we giving out points here? Even as a beginner to NASCAR, it's good to know something about the car itself. NASCAR stands for the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing. So from its earliest days, we're talking about cars that were stock. They were from a showroom floor. And the manufacturers of NASCARs today try to keep that. NASCAR has 3 major auto manufacturers with whom it partners. So there's Toyota, there's Ford, and Chevy. So every car on the track is one of those 3 makes. So in the NASCAR Cup Series, for example, a Toyota is meant to look like a Toyota Camry. In the case of Ford, these days it's meant to look like a Ford Mustang, and in the case of Chevy, it's meant to look like a Chevy Camaro. But in each case, it's meant to look like the street car it's supposed to resemble, but it's built out of this sheet metal and carbon fiber laid over tube steel that's welded together in the basic shape of a car. So the car itself has to weigh 3,300 pounds. Those are NASCAR rules. And again, it goes back to the original days where NASCAR was stock cars. It was directly from a showroom floor. In the olden days, they used to have the saying, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. Well, that's because those cars were more or less the actual car that the public could go buy. It's not at all the case anymore that the public can buy this car that they see on the track, but that's NASCAR's roots, and some of the things remain. Some of the other terms that you're going to hear about the car itself throughout the race, you may hear the term clip, front clip, rear clip. Really what they're talking about is that the car is broken up into 3 sections. The front clip is essentially that part of the tubular steel frame, it's all welded together, where the engine sits. And then in the back you have the same concept of essentially where the trunk on a street car would be. Those are the front clip and the rear clip. And NASCARs are engineered for those things to crush and to break away in an accident. In fact, go back a few years and see Austin Dillon's accident at Daytona when he flew up into the catch fence, and you'll see that the car, as it rolls away after the accident, the whole front of it is torn off. Well, that's by design, and in so doing, the car has taken the impact, or some of the impact, away from some of the energy from that impact, away from where the driver sits, because it intentionally tore away. In the center, you have what's called the roll cage. Now, a roll cage is exactly what it sounds like. It's meant to protect the driver in case the car rolls over. So, whereas the front clip and the rear clip are made from somewhat lighter steel, that center roll cage where the driver sits is completely built to keep that driver safe. Back to Austin Dillon's crash at Daytona, you'll see that the front clip, or the engine in other words, is completely torn away from the car, and the rear clip is torn away, and that center section remains, and it remains basically intact. All of that is by design. A NASCAR engine is capable of producing 900 horsepower, and you'll see that on tracks that are 1 mile and longer, that NASCAR is intentionally limiting those 900 horses to around 550, and on the shorter tracks, they limit it to around 750. Another term that you're going to hear during a NASCAR race is tapered spacer. Unless they do a lot to limit the power of the engine, those cars are going to be going well over 200 miles an hour. So what they do is they restrict airflow. The tapered spacer and the restrictor plate are there to limit the amount of air that gets into the engine. Now, another term that you're going to hear a lot during a NASCAR race is tight versus loose conditions as it relates to the car itself. Tight versus loose is really the difference between oversteer and understeer as the general population knows it. Oversteer is Simply, I'm turning the wheel left, the car is turning more left than I would like it to. Understeer is exactly the opposite effect, and sometimes NASCAR drivers will call it pushing. If you're listening to the radio, they'll say the car is pushing, and really what they mean is that they're trying to turn left and the car is going not as left as they would like it to. It's going more straight than left. Let's keep going with these terms that you hear during a NASCAR race. Aero package. Aero package is simply the setup of the car such that it creates more or less drag. All of this is dictated by NASCAR as a governing body. Another term you're going to hear a lot is drafting. And drafting is simply this. When a car is moving through space, it has to overcome the resistance in front of it, the air in front of it. A NASCAR cuts through the air at almost 200 miles an hour. So it has to create a lot of force to overcome the resistance in front of it.
Hamlin slid up into a hole that wasn't there behind the 4 of Kevin Harvick.
Now watch that lane start to surge forward with the big run because of that.
When 2 or more NASCARs are drafting, what happens is you'll have the lead car and another car, at least one, pull in behind it. They'll be nose to tail. A lot of times they'll be touching or nearly touching. And you will have the car in front breaking through all that wind resistance. I'm just going to read my notes here for this part of it because I want to just basically mention or give a shout out to every one of the NASCAR tracks. And these change from time to time. They change based on the series, but at least you'll have some familiarity. So the 2.5 mile tracks or the super speedways, you have Daytona International Speedway, Daytona, Florida. That's really the birthplace of NASCAR itself. In fact, in the olden days, it was the Daytona Beach and Road Course. So sometimes you'll see old videos or old pictures of cars racing along the beach. And a lot of that happened at Daytona because the sand was compacted enough that they created a racetrack. That racetrack was actually 4 miles long. So you'd have basically two 2-mile straights, and then you'd have turns in between each one. Half of the track was on the road and half of the track was on sand. So Daytona is a 2.5 mile track. Those are super speedways. Talladega Nights, that's another famous one. Pocono is a 2.5 mile track. Pocono they call the Tricky Triangle. It's in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. It is actually a triangle. There are actually 3 distinct turns at Pocono. Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the Brickyard as they call it, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, in case you didn't know, was originally paved with bricks. So they call it the Brickyard. There are 4 very distinct turns at the Brickyard. And then we have 2-mile tracks, Michigan and Auto Club Speedway in California. So Auto Club Speedway is in Southern California, Michigan, pretty self-explanatory where it's at. Those are 2-mile tracks. And then there's a whole slew of 1.5 mile tracks. And ask any NASCAR fan and they may take issue with how many 1.5 mile tracks there are. But let's just read them off. Charlotte Motor Speedway, Kansas Motor Speedway, Kentucky Motor Speedway, Atlanta Motor Speedway, Homestead, Miami, Las Vegas Motor Speedway, Texas Motor Speedway, and Chicagoland are all 1.5 mile tracks. Then you go down to 1 mile tracks. You have Phoenix, Dover in Dover, Delaware, and New Hampshire. Then you have 1/2 mile tracks. You have Bristol. Some of the best racing in NASCAR is done at Bristol. It's a 1/2 mile track, literally 40 cars in a 1/2 mile. They call it the Last Great Coliseum. It has seats surrounding it completely. It is legitimately built like a coliseum. Bristol's in Bristol, Tennessee, and then you have Martinsville in Martinsville, Virginia, another 1/2 mile track. Personally, I think Martinsville is kind of a boring track, although I'm sure I'll have plenty of people disagreeing with me there. Then you have some road courses, and depending on the year, they'll do these road courses, or they have done these road courses. Sonoma in Sonoma, California, up in wine country, you got Watkins Glen, which is in New York. You've got the Roval, the Charlotte Roval, which is essentially a combination of the oval at Charlotte Motor Speedway, that 1.5 mile track, and then instead of completing the oval, it juts out into the infield road course, and so there's right turns and left turns at the Roval. And then you have the Daytona Road Course, which hasn't been run but a few times. However, it was run in 2020 recently. So, and then you have a couple of other tracks. You've got some famous ones, actually. Darlington. Darlington is the shape of an egg. So one end of it is a tighter turn than the other end of it. Rumor has it that was because the owner in the 50s wanted to save the a minnow pond that was at one end of the track. So anyway, Darlington is shaped like an egg. They call it the Lady in Black, and one earns their Darlington stripes when they race at Darlington because the two ends of the track are so different. A car can be very loose. Again, it can slide more out of one turn and end up hitting the wall, and so there's a section of the track that's sort of laden with stripes on the wall, and they call it getting your Darlington stripe. Then there's Richmond, which is a 0.75 mile track. Again, kind of odd. So one thing about the tracks, though, that you'll hear during a NASCAR race is you'll hear them talk about turn 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you'll sit there and you think, this is an oval. There's really only 2 turns. That's true. So there may be some dispute as to why this is the case, but it's probably because it's just easier to tell a crew chief or tell your crew or tell a driver where something is in relation to a track if you essentially say 4 distinct turns. There's turns 1, 2, 3, and 4 on an oval, and then there's the front stretch and the back stretch. So you really have 6 sections of the track where a driver can reference something, where a car is loose, where it's tight, where it's got more power, where it's got less grip. So by subdividing the track, that's likely a reason as to why they refer to 4 separate turns on an oval. Another theory that I've heard is that everything is sort of descended from Indianapolis Motor Speedway, although that's not really true. That oval racing essentially came from there, and Indianapolis Motor Speedway does have 4 distinct turns. So as you kind of compress those down into, instead of 4 distinct turns, you get what becomes basically an oval. They still referenced 4 turns. Who knows what the real reason is, but these are theories. So I'm no expert, but when we're talking about how to watch a NASCAR race, we have to talk a little bit about strategy. So here's what I can say about strategy. Because NASCAR races are so long, they're 400 laps sometimes, it really becomes a strategic move to pace out your pit stops and when you're going to drive hard and when you're going to sort of let others drive hard. And when you get into tracks like Daytona, when you get into maybe even some of the longer races, the Coke 600 maybe, for example, there ends up being a lot of pacing that has to go on. For example, when you're at a super speedway, you'll notice the media refers to the big one, right? So a lot of times you'll have these huge wrecks, and a lot of them will happen at the end of a race. Sometimes it pays for the driver in the back to not be pushing at the front of the field, to not be pushing it at the front of the bunch of cars at the end of a super speedway race, because the huge accident is almost inevitable. And the person who wins the race is one who simply survives the race. Again, pit stops. Do you take 2 tires? Do you take 4 tires? Right? You could come in for a pit stop and only take 2 tires and essentially be running on old tires that have less grip to them. But your pit stop was faster, and maybe you came in the pits and you were in 11th place, and because you only took 2 tires, now you come out and you're in 4th place. You beat 7 other cars off of pit road. So let's address another thing. How does someone get good at being a NASCAR driver? Well, you've never heard of me, certainly not on a NASCAR track. Therefore, I know nothing about this topic. No, but in all seriousness, how does one get good at being a NASCAR driver? Just like any other motorsport, it requires not only a lot of training, but the ability to see. And NASCAR is very situational. NASCAR is situational because the cars are so big, they create such a, an aerodynamic shift for the cars behind it. Dale Earnhardt, for example. A lot of people say that Dale Earnhardt could see the air, right? That's why he was so successful. A 7-time champion, he could see the air. In knowing when to draft, who to draft, how to draft, and knowing when to brake. Just like any form of racing, NASCAR, you're talking about tenths of a second. So how does one get good at being a NASCAR driver? Well, kind of this way they get good at being any other racing driver. They get good at knowing when to brake and when to accelerate, and in the case of NASCAR, when to draft. Let me address real fast what can sometimes be a controversial topic among sports fans, which is the fitness needed to drive in a NASCAR. So it's true that in stick and ball sports, there's typically a lot of running, unless you're in baseball. Don't try to tell me otherwise. There's a lot of standing around in baseball. Baseball fans, you know I'm talking. The greatest baseball player of all time was pretty overweight. Babe Ruth? I'm just saying. Anyway, back on topic here. Driver fitness. So it's not so much about needing to be fit, but it's sometimes 3 hours in 140-degree temperatures. What a NASCAR driver needs a lot of is endurance, is stamina, is the ability to withstand. 140 degrees for 3 hours is a grueling place to work. And they have to maintain top levels of concentration the entire time, otherwise they're going to end up spinning. Fitness for a race car driver is not necessarily about running the fastest or being the strongest. It's about endurance. Alright guys, so I just want to finish this video with a couple of thoughts, my 2 cents about what makes NASCAR so interesting. I didn't get into NASCAR until I was about 25. Alright, so I didn't grow up in any kind of racing family. This isn't something we watched a lot. I can recall watching a NASCAR race on a lazy Saturday afternoon once when I was in high school. And that was really my exposure to it, other than maybe video games as a kid. So what is there to love about NASCAR? And simply, I'm going to say that NASCAR is an unscripted concert at 200 miles an hour. What's not to love about that? If you go to a NASCAR race, not only are you going to be in the presence of 40,000 horsepower among 40 cars, you're going to be experiencing what it's like for them. Now, it's hard to get the real effect for it on TV, and I can see that. So you should try a NASCAR race. Go to a NASCAR race, right? And you're going to have, you got to think about what NASCAR is trying to sell here. And sometimes it gets accused of being a little bit like the WWE, for example. But at the end of the day, one of the real selling points of NASCAR is the personalities there. Knowing the drivers, knowing who they are, knowing the storyline. There's always a storyline with NASCAR. And again, it's not scripted. It's not like NASCAR is telling these drivers what to do. But you'll see fights break out. You'll see drivers that have beef with each other. One of the great of all time that you can see is the beef between Matt Kenseth and Joey Logano back in 2015. It was epic, right? And this is the unscripted nature of it. This is part of the reason I love NASCAR. I love racing, but there's a lot of strategy involved. There's a lot of things to look for. There's a lot of things to see how they run the racing line. There's a lot of things to see when, for example, you have a car that's running low on the track through the turn, and you have a car that's running high on the track through the turn, and they're competing for the same position. Because the car that's at the high bank on the track is inherently driving further distance, right? So they in order to keep up, they have to be driving faster. You think about all these things, and you combine it with all the storylines in NASCAR, and it creates an amazing sport to watch. One that at one time was the biggest in America, and it's not anymore, but it can be. So get to know the drivers, get to know the personalities, get to know the teams you like. I have mine. I have the ones that I like and the ones that I love to hate, right? And a lot of people come to watch the wrecks and the rubbing and all those things, and those are great, but the racing itself is just as good if you know a little bit about what you're looking for. And that's what I hope you get out of this video. Don't forget to follow, hit the subscribe button below, link to my Instagram and my Twitter feed below, and also to my website. Got a blog post up there now about what each of the major racing series is selling, so that you can find one that fits you best. Even if it isn't NASCAR, go ahead and give it a look. Leave a comment, give me the thumbs up, give me a like, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and until next time, thanks for watching.